Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. First of all, I would like to welcome Professor Jeffrey Kenny, who flew all the way for more than 24 hours to KL from Indiana, to Professor Chandra Muzaffar for making his time to be with us despite the last-minute chaotic change, to Dr. Zulkifli Ahmad, my best friend and colleague, my teacher, my Murabi as well, and of course YB Zairil, CEO of Penang Institute, and not forgetting our hosts, Dr. Azmi and Dr. Diansha, who just completed her PhD. Welcome everyone, and today the topic is going to be basically a very broad topic, and I guess it's very interesting considering the rise of the Islamic State that metamorphosed from ISIS or ISIL. So I guess it's very important for us to understand about this problem that is occurring in the 21st century that we have never thought could have happened a few years ago, right? And I think before I open up give the session to Prof. Jeffrey, I would like to invite YB Zairil to give his opening speech. Thank
you. Thank you, Dr. Farouk. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, of course, to Professor Jeffrey Kenny, Dr. Farouk, Dr. Zul, Dr. Chandra, and everyone else here today. Firstly, on behalf of the Penang Institute, I'd like to, the co-organizer of today's roundtable discussion, I'd like to welcome everyone here. I think, it's a bit fortunate and unfortunate that we had a bit of a last-minute change of venue. It's unfortunate due to the inconvenience caused, but it's also fortunate in the sense that, for me, it's actually my first time, having a program in University Malaya. I've spoken at National University of Singapore, Oxford University, and Edinburgh, but it's my first time in Malaya. So I think when attempting to make sense of geopolitical conflict, it's usually very tempting to apply simplistic ideological terms, such as Sunni versus Shia, Islam versus the West, democracy versus communism, as if it was predetermined that certain races, or civilizations, or ideologies were naturally irreconcilable. Framing conflict in such one-dimensional terms is problematic because labels merely represent points of view. For example, some see the Vietnam War as a classic Cold War clash between democracy and communism. Others would prefer to call it resistance against perceived Western imperialism. Similarly, the 1979 Iranian Revolution has been called an ideological conflict by some and a cultural one by others. So I think in order to better shape our response, and I think we're all here to ensure that we understand the situation so that we can develop better policy responses towards any kind of geopolitical conflict, I think it's critical for us to first develop a more nuanced understanding of it. In other words, it's not enough for us to know who the adversarial parties are, what they claim their objectives to be, but also we should appreciate the underlying historical and political dynamics involved. And so I think the conflation of ideology in geopolitical conflict is perhaps something that's very, very evident in the case of the Middle East, which I'm sure we'll touch on later, in a discussion today. This is a region that has, since the fall of the Ottoman Empire, almost 100 years ago, it's been beset by violent and continuous conflicts ranging from genocide to popular revolutions. That the region is constantly at war should really come as no surprise, given the post-colonial and socio-economic context in which it has evolved. For one thing, the Arab world remains underdeveloped, poorly educated, with more than 1/3 of its population illiterate. It does not help that there is also little effort on the part of often Western-backed ruling regimes to cultivate knowledge among its populations. Politically, the region's modern genesis, I think it's important to emphasize here, that the nation states that we recognize today were actually carved out and created by the Western powers in the aftermath of World War I. And so these artificial borders not only disrupted long-standing historical ties and cultural heritage, they also ended up creating many new problems. One really good example is Kurdistan, a culturally contiguous community that has been divided and subsumed by Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran. And being minorities now in these 4 different countries, the Kurds continue to be oppressed till today. An even more familiar case is, of course, that of Palestine and the British engineered creation of the State of Israel. While one people gained the state, another lost theirs. And as the late night news reminds us week in and week out, this territorial dispute remains painfully and bitterly unresolved. So in short, I think there are numerous historical and political socio-economic factors at play when one considers the many, many conflicts taking place. Yet, most of these dynamics are conveniently ignored when the Orientalist lens is put on and the ideological label of Islam is attached. Hence, when the West is made the bogeyman and the target of conflict, it is usually understood as a clash of civilizations, as is the case with Al-Qaeda and the self-proclaimed Islamic State Caliphate. However, when they fight amongst themselves, it's deemed as sectarian conflict between the Sunnis and the Shias. Either way, it fits the narrative of Islam as a belligerent religion and its followers as warmongers. And so this Orientalist understanding of Middle Eastern conflict is not only simplistic, it is also dangerously misleading. Take, for example, the much touted sectarian conflict that's taking place with Saudi Arabia representing the Sunni Wahhabi movement and Iran representing the Shia movement. This conflict may espouse sectarian rhetoric, but it's obvious from their actions that motivations are less to do with theology than they are to do with regional power politics. Take their approach to alliance building. Tehran has over the years funded and supported 2 Palestinian Islamist movements, namely the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas, 2 principally Sunni groups, although it must be added that I think the relations with Hamas has soured a little in recent times due to Syria. But on the other hand, the Saudis, who have publicly backed the Sunnis against the Shia regime in Syria, also at the same time have committed strong support for Ayat Alawi, which is the Iraqi vice president and former prime minister, despite the fact that he is a Shia leader. And for that matter, if Riyadh's foreign policy was truly sectarian-driven, then the Ikhwanul Muslimun, or the Muslim Brotherhood, should be a natural Sunni ally. Yet, both in Egypt and in Syria, this is far from the case. Therefore, I think it's safe to say that religious ideology, as much as it colors the discourse and rhetoric of conflict, is secondary to more important geopolitical considerations. Hence, it's counterproductive to prescribe ideological labels to conflict in the Middle East, or anywhere else for that matter. The fact is that conflict in most of the post-colonial world today can be traced to historical and political legacies. This applies to conflicts even closer to home, like what's happening in South Asia. This insurgency that's happening has now assumed an Islamic identity, complete with jihadi rhetoric. However, remove the ideological veneer and we find yet again another region in limbo, where modern political boundaries do not match pre-existing cultural boundaries, having been artificially divided by the Bangkok Agreement, Anglo-Siamese Treaty 1909. And then, of course, you add the forced cultural assimilation policy of the Thai government, and you have a very understandable resistance. Therefore, it is instructive that when discussing any kind of geopolitical conflict, that we take great care to ensure we do not conflate its underlying causes with its apparent ideology. Well, there's no denying that ideological motivations play an important role in the dynamics of conflict. Excessive focus on it will lead us to miss the forest for the trees. So I think it's very important for us to be aware of all these, and I'm sure Professor Kenny today will lead us in a good discussion to flesh these ideas out. So with that, thank you all once again for coming. I wish we didn't have to have the last minute change of venue, but still very happy that everyone is here. With that, again, I wish you thank you, happy discussion. Wassalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.